I heard my stepmother on the phone saying, "The facility can take my stepson on Monday. Just tell everyone he ran away." She was in the kitchen talking to someone while my 13-year-old brother Jamie sat in the next room organizing his dinosaur collection by geological period like he did every Sunday morning. Jamie is autistic and follows the same routine every single day, which is why hearing her say he'd run away made no sense. He'd never left the house alone in his entire life. "No one will question it," she continued into the phone. "Kids like him go missing all the time." I stood frozen in the hallway holding the laundry basket I'd been carrying upstairs. My stepmother Carol had married my dad 3 years ago after my mom died, and she'd always seemed patient with Jamie. "The paperwork is already signed. His father doesn't even know what he's signing anymore." That made my blood run cold because my dad had early onset dementia and signed whatever Carol put in front of him. I backed away quietly and went to Jamie's room where he was lining up his dinosaurs. "Hey buddy, we're going on an adventure today," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. Jamie looked up at me and frowned. "It's Sunday." Sundays are for dinosaurs, then lunch at 12:15, then nature documentary at 2. His routine was everything to him, and breaking it caused meltdowns. "I know, but this is a special dinosaur adventure. We're going to the Natural History Museum to see real fossils." That got his attention. Jamie loved fossils more than anything. While he got his jacket, I texted my Aunt Lisa, who lived 2 hours away. "Carol is putting Jamie in an institution tomorrow. Come now." Lisa responded immediately that she was on her way. Carol appeared in Jamie's doorway looking suspicious. "Where are you taking him?" She used her fake sweet voice. "Museum," I said simply. "He finished his dinosaurs early, so I thought we'd go out." She stepped closer and I could smell wine on her breath even though it was only 10 in the morning. "He needs to stay here. The doctor is coming tomorrow for his evaluation." There had been no mention of any doctor until now. "What evaluation?" I asked while Jamie started getting agitated because we were blocking his path to the door. Carol smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "For his own good. He needs professional care, more than we can provide." Jamie started rocking, which he did when stressed. "Need to go. Need to go. Museum closes at 5. Takes 43 minutes to drive there." He'd memorized every detail about the museum. Carol reached for him, but I stepped between them. "We'll be back by dinner." I took Jamie's hand and led him past her. She followed us to the car. "You can't just take him." "I'm his legal guardian now." That was news to me. "Since when?" I asked while helping Jamie buckle his seatbelt. He was counting his dinosaur facts book pages to calm himself. "Since your father signed custody over to me last week. For medical decisions." She pulled out a document from her pocket like she'd been carrying it around waiting for this moment. I looked at it and saw my father's shaky signature at the bottom. "Dad doesn't have the capacity to sign legal documents," I said. "His neurologist said that 6 months ago." Carol laughed. "Prove it. By the time you get a lawyer, your brother will be safe in a facility that can properly handle his needs." That's when Jamie spoke up, surprising both of us. Carol told the man on the phone that the insurance pays $8,000 a month for autistic residential care. She said she needs the money for her sister's surgery. We both turned to stare at him. Jamie rarely acknowledged conversations happening around him. "When did she say that, Jamie?" I asked gently. He thought carefully. "Tuesday at 4:17 p.m. She was in Dad's office. The man's name was Richard. He said the facility is in Nevada." Carol's face went white. "He's lying. He makes things up. That's part of his condition." But Jamie never lied. His brain didn't work that way. He repeated exactly what he heard word for word. Carol grabbed her phone and called someone. "It's falling apart. The sister knows. Get here now." We tried to leave, but she won't let us. A van pulled up within minutes. 2 men got out wearing medical uniforms. "We're here for James," one said. "Family requested transport for psychiatric evaluation." Carol waved the fake custody paper. "I have custody. Take him." Jamie started having a meltdown then, screaming and hitting himself, which he only did in extreme distress. The men moved toward him, but I blocked them. "He's autistic, not psychiatric. You're traumatizing him." That's when our neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, came out. He was a retired police chief. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. He stepped out onto his porch and his eyes went straight to the van, then to Carol, then to the 2 men in fake medical uniforms. He pulled out his phone and held it up. "I already called the real police about a kidnapping in progress. They're 2 minutes out." The 2 men stopped moving toward Jamie. One of them looked at Carol and said they needed to leave. Carol's voice got shrill and desperate. "No, take him now. I have legal custody." but the men were already backing up toward their van because they could hear the sirens getting louder. Mr. Rodriguez kept his phone pointed at all of us, recording everything. His hand was steady like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Carol's face turned completely white when the sirens got close enough that we could tell they were coming to our street. She grabbed one of the men's arms. "You can't leave." We had a deal. He shook her off and got in the van. The other man was already in the driver's seat starting the engine. Carol screamed at them, but they pulled away from the curb and drove off fast. Mr. Rodriguez walked over to me and Jamie. "Keep the boy close. Don't let her touch him." I wrapped my arms around Jamie while he rocked back and forth, counting under his breath. Stegosaurus lived 150 million years ago. Allosaurus lived 155 million years ago. Diplodocus lived 154 million years ago. He always went through his dinosaur timeline when he was scared. 2 police cars turned onto our street with their lights flashing. Carol tried to smooth down her hair and put on a calm face, but her hands were shaking. The first officer out of the car was a woman with dark hair pulled back tight. She looked at all of us standing in the driveway and immediately separated us. "Everyone stay where you are. We're going to talk to each of you separately." Mr. Rodriguez stepped forward. "Officer, I'm Felix Rodriguez, retired police chief from the 5th Precinct. I witnessed the entire incident and I have video evidence on my phone." The officer's expression changed when he said he was former police. She nodded and took his phone to watch the recording. The second officer, a younger guy with red hair, came over to me and Jamie. Carol started talking before anyone asked her anything. "This is a family matter. My stepchildren are upset because I'm trying to get proper care for the autistic one." The female officer held up her hand. "Ma'am, please wait over there. We'll get to you in a moment." She turned back to Mr. Rodriguez's phone and watched the whole video. I could see her face getting more serious as she watched. The male officer knelt down near Jamie, but not too close. "Hey buddy, I'm Officer Mike. Can you tell me what happened today?" Jamie kept rocking and counting. I put my hand on his shoulder. "He's autistic. He needs a minute to calm down." The officer nodded and stood back up. "Take your time." He looked at me instead. "Can you tell me what's going on?" I pulled out the custody document Carol had shown me. "My stepmother says she has custody of my brother, but my dad has dementia. His doctor said 6 months ago that he can't sign legal documents anymore." The officer took the paper and looked at it closely. He called over to his partner. "Sarah, you need to see this." The female officer came over and examined the document. She pulled out her radio. "We need a supervisor here. Possible elder abuse and fraud situation." Carol heard that and her voice got loud again. "That's ridiculous. I'm his wife. I'm trying to help my family." Mr. Rodriguez spoke up from where he was standing. "The 2 men who just left were trying to take the boy by force. The woman called them here specifically to transport him against his will." The female officer, Sarah, wrote everything down in her notebook. She looked at Carol. "Ma'am, who were those men and why were they here?" Carol crossed her arms. "They were medical transport. I arranged for my stepson to be evaluated at a facility." Sarah's pen stopped moving. "What facility?" Carol hesitated. "A residential treatment center in Nevada, for his autism." Sarah and Mike exchanged a look. Mike got on his radio and asked for the license plate number from Mr. Rodriguez's video. Then he called it in to have the van stopped and the men brought back for questioning. That's when Jamie suddenly stopped rocking. He stood up straight and looked right at Sarah. Carol told the man on the phone that the insurance pays $8,000 a month for autistic residential care. She said she needs the money for her sister's surgery. Tuesday at 4:17 p.m. She was in Dad's office. The man's name was Richard. He said the facility is in Nevada. Everyone went quiet. Sarah stared at Jamie. "You heard her say that?" Jamie nodded. "She also said Dad doesn't know what he's signing anymore. She said kids like me go missing all the time and no one questions it." Carol's face went from white to red. "He's lying. He makes things up. That's part of his condition. He doesn't understand what he hears." But Mr. Rodriguez shook his head. "Officer, I've known this boy for 3 years. He's never lied about anything. His brain doesn't work that way. If he says he heard it exactly like that." Sarah asked Jamie more questions. "What else did Carol say on the phone?" Jamie thought for a second. "Richard said the paperwork was ready. Carol said she'd have me there by Monday. Richard said to tell everyone I ran away. Carol said no one would question it because autistic kids go missing all the time." Every word Jamie said matched exactly what I'd heard Carol say on the phone that morning. Sarah wrote it all down while Mike called for another unit. Carol tried to interrupt, but Sarah told her to be quiet. "Ma'am, you need to stop talking right now." Then Sarah asked Jamie about the time and date again, and he repeated it exactly the same. Tuesday at 4:17 p.m. Sarah asked him what day of the week that was, and Jamie said it was Tuesday, and that was his library day, and he'd been organizing his dinosaur books by author. She asked what he'd had for lunch that day, and he said turkey sandwich with no crust and apple slices and milk. Everything he said was specific and detailed and never changed. Carol tried one more time. You can't believe him. He's disabled. Mr. Rodriguez stepped closer. Officer, I need to tell you something about this boy. 3 years ago, there was a car accident on our street. Jamie was outside and saw the whole thing. When police interviewed him, he described every detail, including the license plate numbers of both cars, the exact time down to the minute, what the drivers were wearing, and the sequence of events. Every single thing he said was confirmed by traffic cameras. The kid's memory is perfect. Sarah looked at Carol with a completely different expression now. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come to the station to answer some questions. Carol started backing up toward the house. I don't have to go anywhere. This is my home. Mike moved to block her path to the door. Actually, ma'am, you do need to come with us. That's when I heard tires squealing and saw my Aunt Lisa's car fly around the corner and slam to a stop in front of our house. She jumped out and ran toward us. Where's Harold? Where's my brother? My stomach dropped. In all the chaos with Carol trying to take Jamie, I'd completely forgotten about Dad. He was still inside the house and had been alone this whole time. Lisa didn't wait for an answer. She ran past the officers and into the house. I started to follow her, but Sarah stopped me. Stay here with your brother. Mike went into the house after Lisa. We could hear her calling for Dad. Then we heard her voice get upset. Harold? Harold, can you hear me? Mike came back out. We need an ambulance. The father is in distress. Sarah called it in while I tried to get past her to go inside. That's my dad. I need to see him. She let me go, but told Jamie to stay with Mr. Rodriguez. I ran into the house and found Lisa in Dad's bedroom. He was sitting on the edge of his bed looking confused and scared. His shirt was on backwards and he had one sock on. Lisa was holding his hand and talking to him gently. Harold, it's me, Lisa. Can you tell me what day it is? Dad looked at her, but his eyes were unfocused. Where's Carol? Carol takes care of things. Lisa's jaw got tight. Carol's not here right now. When did you last eat? Dad couldn't answer. He just kept asking for Carol. I felt sick looking at him because he seemed worse than the last time I'd seen him just 2 days ago. A paramedic came in and started checking Dad's vital signs. Lisa explained to them about his dementia and asked if he was dehydrated or in medical distress. The paramedic said his blood pressure was high, and he seemed confused beyond his normal baseline. They wanted to take him to the hospital for evaluation. Sarah came into the room with her supervisor, a sergeant with gray hair and a serious face. Lisa turned to them. I'm Harold Moore's sister. I need to know what's happening with Carol. The sergeant introduced himself and asked Lisa for identification. She showed him her driver's license and explained she'd been trying to stay involved with Dad's care, but Carol had been limiting her access. She stopped returning my calls 3 months ago. She said Harold was doing fine and didn't need visitors because it confused him. I should have pushed harder. The sergeant asked about Dad's medical condition, and Lisa pulled out her phone to show him emails from Dr. Swanson, Dad's neurologist. 6 months ago, Dr. Swanson documented that Harold lacks the capacity to make legal or medical decisions. Any documents he signed after that date are invalid. The sergeant read through the emails carefully. Then he looked at the custody document Carol had been waving around. This is dated 2 weeks ago. Lisa's face went hard. Then it's fraudulent. Harold couldn't legally sign that. The sergeant called for Adult Protective Services and Child Protective Services to come to the house immediately. Within minutes, a woman in her 30s arrived carrying a worn leather bag and wearing practical clothes that looked like they'd survived countless emergency calls. She introduced herself as Kathleen Walls from Child Protective Services and asked if we could all talk separately. Lisa stayed with Dad while Kathleen took me into the kitchen first. She sat across from me at the table and pulled out a notebook, but kept her eyes on my face instead of writing anything down yet. She asked me to describe a normal day in our house before today, and I told her about Jamie's routines, Dad's confusion, Carol's increasing frustration with both of them. Kathleen wrote down specific details like when Carol started drinking during the day and when she stopped letting Lisa visit. Then she asked if Carol had ever hurt Jamie or Dad physically. I said no, but she'd yell at Jamie when he had meltdowns and she'd gotten Dad to sign papers he didn't understand. After 20 minutes with me, Kathleen went to talk to Jamie in his room. I could hear her gentle voice asking him questions and Jamie's careful, literal answers. He told her his exact daily schedule and how Carol got angry when he needed extra time for transitions. He said Carol told him 3 weeks ago that he was too much work, and maybe he'd be happier somewhere else with other kids like him. Kathleen spent almost an hour with Jamie, letting him show her his entire dinosaur collection while she asked about his relationship with each family member. When she came back downstairs, she looked troubled but didn't share what Jamie had said. She talked to Lisa next, then spent time with Dad, though that conversation was shorter because he kept getting confused about who she was. By early afternoon, Kathleen asked to see the custody document Carol had been waving around earlier. Lisa pulled it from her purse where the police had returned it after photographing it. Kathleen studied the paper carefully, running her finger over the notary seal at the bottom. She took out her phone and snapped several pictures from different angles, then called someone and described what she was seeing. She used words like irregular stamp impression and possible forgery. She told whoever was on the phone that she was sending the images right away for verification. Less than an hour later, her phone rang and she stepped outside to take the call. When she came back in, her expression was harder than before. She told us the document was fraudulent because the notary seal didn't match any registered notary in the county, and the document had never been filed with the family court like it should have been. Carol had created fake paperwork and carried it around like it was real. Kathleen called the police sergeant who'd been here earlier and explained what they'd discovered. Within 30 minutes, 2 officers arrived with paperwork for a search warrant. They asked Lisa to show them where Carol kept her personal belongings and office space. Lisa led them to the small room off the kitchen that Carol used as her home office. The officers started going through the desk drawers and filing cabinet while Kathleen, Lisa, and I waited in the living room. Jamie sat on the floor organizing his dinosaurs again because the routine helped him feel safe after all the disruption. I could hear the officers talking quietly, and the sound of papers being moved around. After about 40 minutes, one of them called for Kathleen to come look at something. She went into the office and came back out looking grim. She asked Lisa to come see as well. They were in there for another 20 minutes before returning to where I waited with Jamie. The officer explained they'd found multiple documents with forged signatures, all supposedly signed by Dad in the past 6 months. There were medical consent forms, financial authorizations, insurance documents, and 3 different versions of custody papers. Carol had been practicing Dad's signature and getting better at it over time. They also found a folder with information about facilities in Nevada and Arizona, including fee schedules and payment arrangements. One document showed Carol would receive $2,000 for every placement she facilitated. Lisa pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Dr. Swanson's number. She stepped into the hallway to make the call while the officers continued documenting what they'd found. I could hear Lisa explaining the situation and asking about Dad's capacity evaluation from 6 months ago. Her voice got louder when she described the forged documents and Carol's scheme. After about 10 minutes, she came back and put her phone on speaker so Dr. Swanson could talk to the officers and Kathleen. Dr. Swanson's voice was clear and professional as she confirmed she'd documented in detail that Dad lacked the capacity to make legal or medical decisions as of 6 months ago. She said she'd sent copies of her evaluation to Dad's primary care doctor and had discussed it with Dad and Carol in a family meeting. Carol had been present when Dr. Swanson explained that any legal documents Dad signed after that date would be invalid. Dr. Swanson said she was shocked that Carol had continued getting Dad to sign things and would provide written testimony and her complete medical records for any legal proceedings. She also offered to conduct a new evaluation of Dad's current state if needed. Kathleen thanked her and ended the call, then made notes about everything Dr. Swanson had said. By late afternoon, Kathleen told us she'd made her preliminary determination. She said that based on the interviews, the fraudulent documents, and Dr. Swanson's testimony, there was clear evidence of elder abuse and attempted child endangerment. She was recommending that Jamie and I stay in the house with Lisa as temporary guardian while the investigation continued. Dad would also remain at home but would need supervision and a formal capacity evaluation. Carol would not be allowed to return to the house or have any contact with any of us pending the outcome of the investigation. The police sergeant said they were placing an emergency protective order that would be served to Carol at the station. Kathleen said she'd file her report tonight and a judge would review everything first thing in the morning for a temporary custody order. The next morning, Jamie's advocate called to tell us she was filing an emergency petition with the court. She explained that based on everything Kathleen documented and the police report about the fake custody papers, she had enough evidence to ask for immediate guardianship changes. The court scheduled a hearing for 3 days from now because of how serious the situation was. I felt sick with worry, but also relieved that someone official was finally stepping in to protect Jamie. Lisa sat with me at the kitchen table while we talked to the advocate about what would happen at the hearing. The advocate said Judge Lorraine would review all the documents, interview people if needed, and make a decision about who should have legal authority over Jamie and Dad. I couldn't stop thinking about how close Carol came to taking Jamie away, and how we almost didn't stop her in time. That afternoon, Lisa's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered, and her expression changed immediately. Carol's lawyer was on the other end trying to set up a meeting to discuss everything. The lawyer kept saying Carol was under a lot of stress and made some bad choices, but she never meant any real harm. He suggested we could work this out without going through a big court battle that would upset everyone. Lisa's voice stayed calm and cold as she told him we would only communicate through our own lawyer from now on. She hung up and looked at me with anger in her eyes. The fact that they were trying to make Carol's actions sound like simple mistakes made me so mad I wanted to scream. Carol had planned to send Jamie away for money and lied to everyone about it. That wasn't stress. It was calculated and wrong. I spent the rest of that day going through every piece of paper in Dad's office. Lisa helped me sort through filing cabinets and desk drawers looking for anything else Carol might have forged. Around 6 in the evening, I found a folder labeled estate planning that made my stomach drop. Inside was a will dated 2 months ago with Dad's signature at the bottom. I read through it and saw that it left everything to Carol and specifically excluded me, Jamie, and Lisa by name. The signature looked shaky and wrong, like someone trying to copy Dad's handwriting but not quite getting it right. I called Lisa over and showed her what I found. She took photos of every page and texted them to our lawyer immediately. Our lawyer called back within 20 minutes and said this was more evidence of Carol's fraud scheme. She asked us to keep looking for any other suspicious documents and to make copies of everything we found. The next day, Amelia came to the house to do a new evaluation of Dad's condition. She spent 2 hours with him in his room, asking questions and doing tests to check his memory and thinking abilities. When she came out, her face looked sad and serious. She sat down with Lisa and me in the living room and explained that Dad's dementia had gotten much worse in just 6 months. She said the stress of Carol's manipulation and the changes in his daily routine probably made it progress faster than it normally would have. Dad couldn't make any legal or medical decisions for himself anymore and needed someone watching him all the time to keep him safe. She would write a detailed report for the court explaining his current state and why any documents he signed in the past 6 months should be considered invalid. Hearing how bad Dad had gotten made me want to cry, but I held it together because there was too much else to handle right now. Tuesday morning started with Jamie's usual routine, but then Kathleen showed up for another interview and everything fell apart. Jamie had been counting on his regular schedule and the change threw him completely off balance. He started rocking and making distressed sounds, then escalated to hitting his hands against his legs. Lisa and I both tried to calm him using the techniques that usually worked, but he was too upset. Kathleen backed off and gave us space while we worked with Jamie. It took almost an hour to get him settled again, with both of us taking turns talking to him softly and helping him regulate his breathing. When he finally calmed down, I sat on the floor next to him feeling exhausted and scared. Carol had wanted to put him in a place where nobody would understand his needs or know how to help him when he got overwhelmed. Those people would have just restrained him or medicated him instead of patiently working through it like we did. The thought of what could have happened made me feel sick. 3 days after the petition was filed, we all got dressed up to go to court. Jamie wore his favorite shirt with a big dinosaur on the front and carried his fax book in both hands. Lisa drove us to the courthouse and we met our lawyer in the lobby. She explained what would happen during the hearing and told Jamie he might be asked some questions by the judge. We walked into the courtroom and I saw Carol sitting at a table with her lawyer on the other side. She looked at us but didn't say anything. Judge Lorraine came in and everyone stood up until she sat down behind her big desk. She started reading through papers in front of her, taking her time and making notes. After about 10 minutes, she looked up and started asking questions about the timeline of everything that happened. She wanted to know exactly when Carol got the fake custody document, when Dad's doctor said he couldn't sign papers anymore, and when the police found all the forged signatures. Her face got more and more serious as she read through the evidence file. Carol's lawyer stood up and started talking about how Carol was just trying to get proper care for Jamie because his needs were too much for the family to handle at home. He said the custody document was a misunderstanding, and Carol never meant to do anything illegal. Judge Lorraine cut him off in the middle of his sentence and pointed at one of the papers in front of her. She said the notary seal on the custody document was completely fake, and that alone was a serious crime. Then she read from the report Jamie's advocate wrote about how well he was doing at home with the right support. She asked Carol's lawyer how sending Jamie away to a facility in another state would help him when he was already stable and happy. The lawyer didn't have a good answer and sat back down looking uncomfortable. Jamie's advocate asked if Jamie could talk to the judge directly. Judge Lorraine said yes and asked Jamie to stand up. He stood next to our table, still holding his fax book, and started reciting Carol's phone conversation from Tuesday at 4:17 p.m. He said every single word exactly the same way he told the police, including Richard's name and the part about the $8,000. Judge Lorraine listened carefully, and then asked Jamie some gentle questions about what he liked to do every day and where he wanted to live. Jamie told her about his dinosaur collection and his routines and said he wanted to stay home with me and Lisa. His voice was clear and honest, and I could see the judge believed every word he said. Judge Lorraine took a short break to review everything one more time. When she came back, she said she was granting Lisa emergency temporary guardianship of both Jamie and Dad. She said I would be Jamie's primary caregiver since I was over 18, but Lisa would have the legal authority to make decisions. Carol's rights as a parent and wife were suspended until the criminal case against her was finished. The judge said Carol couldn't contact any of us or come near our house. I felt relief wash over me so strongly that my hands started shaking. Jamie was safe. Dad was safe. Carol couldn't hurt us anymore. We left the courtroom and walked toward the parking lot. Carol came out of a side door and started screaming at us from across the lot. She yelled that we ruined her life and stole her family, and she would make us pay for what we did. Security guards ran over and grabbed her arms to stop her from coming closer. She kept screaming while they put handcuffs on her. One of the guards told us she just violated the protective order the judge put in place and they were arresting her right now. Watching Carol lose control like that scared me because I realized she was desperate enough to do anything. Even with the court order and the police involved, she might still try to hurt us if she got the chance. The next morning, Lisa helped me set up Jamie's new routine chart on the refrigerator with color-coded sections for each part of his day. We wrote down breakfast at 7:30, therapy sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays, dinosaur organization time on Sunday mornings just like before. Jamie studied the chart carefully and asked 17 questions about what would happen if something ran late or got canceled. I explained we'd built in buffer time between activities so one delay wouldn't mess up everything else. He seemed satisfied with that answer and went to arrange his dinosaur collection in his room using the same system he'd always used. Lisa made phone calls to her boss explaining she needed family leave, and surprisingly they approved 4 weeks immediately. She told me her company had good benefits for situations like ours, and she'd been there long enough to have the time saved up. We interviewed 3 home health aides before finding someone Dad seemed comfortable with. The woman's name was Olivia, and she'd worked with dementia patients for 12 years. She knew how to redirect Dad when he got confused and didn't get frustrated when he asked the same questions repeatedly. By the end of the first week, our household had found a rhythm that actually worked. Jamie followed his routines, Dad had consistent care, and Lisa handled all the legal and medical appointments that kept piling up. 2 weeks after the courthouse incident, a detective called asking us to come to the police station for an interview about Carol's activities. We sat in a conference room with Detective Anderson, who had files spread across the table. He explained they'd been investigating Carol and Richard for the past 10 days and discovered this wasn't their first scheme. They'd been running this operation for 2 years, targeting families with disabled children and elderly relatives. Carol would identify vulnerable families through support groups and online forums, then work her way into their lives. She'd befriend the parents, offer help, gain trust, then start manipulating the situation to get legal control. Once she had guardianship or power of attorney, she'd place the person in Richard's facility and collect kickbacks from the insurance payments. We were the first family who fought back and exposed them before the placement happened. Detective Anderson said they found records of 8 other families where Carol and Richard successfully pulled off the scheme. Those families never realized what happened because Carol made everything look legitimate. The district attorney wanted our full cooperation for prosecution because our case had the clearest evidence of intent and conspiracy. Jamie's recording of the phone conversation combined with the forged documents gave them everything they needed to build a strong case. 3 days later, a financial investigator came to our house with a laptop full of spreadsheets showing where Carol spent the $40,000 she stole from Dad's accounts. I sat at the kitchen table while she walked me through every transaction. Carol withdrew cash regularly and used it for casino visits in Atlantic City. She took 2 trips to Las Vegas that cost $8,000 total. She bought designer clothes and jewelry that showed up on credit card statements. There were payments to a plastic surgery center for procedures she had done. Not a single dollar went toward Dad's care or medical expenses like she claimed. The investigator showed me receipts for things Carol purchased the same week she told Dad she needed money for his medication. She'd bought a $3,000 handbag while Dad went without his prescriptions for 4 days. The sister's surgery story was completely fake. Carol didn't even have a sister according to the background check they ran. She'd made up the entire medical emergency to justify taking money and to make herself look sympathetic. I felt sick looking at the evidence of how thoroughly she'd lied to everyone. The investigator explained they were building a case for financial elder abuse and fraud that would add years to whatever sentence Carol got for the other charges. Carol's lawyer called our lawyer the next week trying to negotiate a plea deal that would keep Carol out of prison. He suggested probation, restitution, and mandatory counseling instead of jail time. Our lawyer told us about the offer during a meeting at his office and asked our opinion. I said absolutely not. Carol had planned to kidnap Jamie and lock him in a facility in another state where we'd never find him. She'd stolen from Dad while he was sick and vulnerable. She'd forged documents and lied to everyone. Lisa agreed with me completely. Our lawyer called the district attorney and told him we opposed any deal that didn't include serious prison time. The DA called us directly 2 days later and explained he had no intention of offering Carol a lenient deal anyway. He said Carol's predatory targeting of vulnerable people and children required the strongest possible consequences. He was pursuing maximum sentences on all charges. Our lawyer told us Carol would likely face 5 to 10 years in prison if convicted on all counts. The fraud charges alone carried 3 to 5 years, and the elder abuse charges added more time. The attempted kidnapping and child endangerment charges could add even more. I felt relief hearing that Carol would face real consequences but also worry about the trial and having to testify about everything that happened. Jamie's advocate came over the following Tuesday with a folder full of information about disability services and support programs we'd never heard of. She sat with Lisa and me at the dining room table and went through each program, explaining what they offered and how to apply. There was respite care funding that would pay for someone to watch Jamie so Lisa and I could take breaks. There were therapy services covered by programs we didn't know existed. There was educational support funding that would help Jamie succeed in the school. The advocate helped us fill out applications for 6 different programs right there at the table. She knew exactly what information each one needed and how to word things to meet their requirements. Within 2 weeks, we got approval for respite care and therapy services. Jamie started working with an occupational therapist named Sarah, who specialized in helping autistic teenagers develop coping strategies. She taught Jamie techniques for handling disruptions to his routine without having meltdowns. She worked with him on recognizing when he was getting overwhelmed and using calming strategies before reaching crisis point. After just 3 sessions, I could see Jamie using the techniques she taught him. When his Tuesday appointment ran late and pushed back his lunchtime, he used the breathing exercises Sarah showed him instead of getting upset. Dad had good days and bad days, but I noticed he seemed more relaxed overall without Carol around. On his bad days, he didn't recognize me or know where he was. On his good days, he remembered recent events and could have real conversations. One good day, about 3 weeks after everything happened, Dad asked me to sit with him in his room. He looked at me with clear eyes and apologized for not protecting Jamie and me from Carol. He said he knew something was wrong, but his mind wasn't working right and he couldn't figure out what to do. I told him it wasn't his fault and that Carol had exploited his illness deliberately. He cried and said he should have been stronger and should have seen through her lies. I held his hand and explained that dementia wasn't something he could control, and Carol was a skilled manipulator who fooled everyone. He asked about Jamie and seemed relieved when I told him Jamie was safe and doing well. But even during that conversation, I could see him getting tired and confused. By the end, he was asking me questions he'd already asked twice. The guilt he carried was obvious even through the dementia, and I wished I could make him understand none of this was his fault. 3 weeks after our court hearing, Detective Anderson called with news that Richard Pittman had been arrested in Nevada. Federal agents raided his facility and found 12 residents who'd been placed there under circumstances similar to what Carol tried to do with Jamie. The facility was shut down immediately, and residents were returned to their families or moved to legitimate care facilities. Investigators found records showing Richard had been running this scheme for 4 years, not just 2. Carol was his most successful recruiter, bringing in more placements than anyone else. Families started coming forward with stories matching ours once the news broke about the arrests. A woman in Pennsylvania described how someone befriended her at a support group, then convinced her to place her autistic son in a facility that turned out to be Richard's operation. A man in Ohio told investigators someone gained power of attorney over his mother, then moved her to Nevada against the family's wishes. The case was becoming much bigger than just our situation. The federal prosecutor's office got involved because Richard's operation crossed state lines. Detective Anderson said our case was crucial because we had the clearest evidence and the most detailed documentation of how the scheme worked. Carol's preliminary criminal hearing happened on a cold morning in late November. Lisa, Jamie, and I sat in the courtroom watching Carol enter with her new lawyer. This was the 3rd lawyer she'd hired after the first 2 quit her case. The lawyer stood up and entered a plea of not guilty on all charges. Then he started arguing that Carol had mental health issues that explained her behavior. He said she'd been under extreme stress caring for a husband with dementia and a special needs stepson. He claimed she'd had a breakdown and wasn't thinking clearly when she made poor decisions. The prosecutor stood up and presented psychiatric evaluations, showing Carol was fully competent and understood exactly what she was doing. The judge reviewed the evidence for 20 minutes, then announced her decision. She ordered a psychiatric evaluation by a court-appointed expert to settle the question of Carol's mental state. But she denied bail, citing Carol's violation of the protective order when she confronted us in the parking lot. The judge said Carol had shown she was a flight risk and a danger to our family. Carol would stay in jail until trial. Watching her face when the judge denied bail, I saw real fear for the first time. She'd been so confident and controlling before, but now she was realizing the consequences were real, and she couldn't manipulate her way out. Lisa and I spent weeks discussing whether to sell Dad's house and move somewhere smaller. The house was too big for our needs and too expensive to maintain. Dad needed more care than the current setup provided, and Jamie needed a stable environment designed around his routines. We finally decided selling was the right choice, even though it meant major disruption. We hired a realtor who specialized in quick sales and started the process of sorting through years of accumulated belongings. The hardest part was deciding what to keep and what to let go. I found boxes of Mom's things Dad had saved and spent an afternoon crying while going through her photographs and letters. Lisa helped me pack up the items that mattered and donated or sold everything else. We looked at 12 houses before finding the right one. It was a ranch-style home with 3 bedrooms and a big backyard. Everything was on one level, which would be easier for Dad as his mobility declined. The backyard had a covered patio and plenty of space for Jamie to set up his interests. The neighborhood was quiet and safe. We made an offer and it was accepted within 2 days. Moving day arrived 6 weeks after we decided to sell. I'd been dreading it because major changes were so hard for Jamie, but we'd prepared him carefully. We let him pick out paint colors for his new room. We measured the space and planned exactly where his dinosaur collection would go. We drew maps showing the layout of the new house. We visited 3 times so he could walk through and get familiar with it. On moving day, Jamie surprised me by staying calm and focused. He directed the movers on where to put his furniture and immediately started setting up his dinosaur organization system in his new room. He'd mapped out a new Sunday morning routine that accommodated the different room layout. He showed me his plan with detailed notes about timing and order. His adaptability encouraged me more than anything else that had happened. I'd been so worried the move would cause a major setback, but instead Jamie was showing me he could handle change when he felt safe and involved in the process. By the end of the day, our new house felt more like home than the old one ever had with Carol there. The court-appointed psychiatrist's report arrived 2 weeks after our move. I sat at the kitchen table reading through pages of technical language that boiled down to one clear conclusion. Carol was fully competent when she planned everything. She understood right from wrong. She knew exactly what she was doing when she forged documents and tried to institutionalize Jamie for money. The psychiatrist found no mental illness, no cognitive impairment, nothing that would excuse her actions. Her lawyer's defense strategy collapsed completely. The district attorney called Lisa that afternoon to explain they were moving forward with prosecution on 12 felony counts: fraud, forgery, elder abuse, child endangerment, conspiracy. Each charge carried serious prison time. Lisa put the phone on speaker so I could hear everything. The prosecutor sounded confident about conviction given the evidence we'd gathered. I felt relief mixed with exhaustion because this legal battle was far from over. That same week, I enrolled in online classes to finish my bachelor's degree. Lisa had been pushing me to maintain my own goals instead of becoming only a caregiver. She reminded me that I was 22 years old with my whole life ahead of me. We worked out a schedule where I could study in the mornings while she handled Dad's breakfast routine, and the home health aide arrived at 9. I took classes in the afternoons when Jamie was at the school and studied at night after everyone went to bed. It felt strange focusing on my education while everything else was chaos, but Lisa insisted it mattered. She said losing myself completely to caregiving would help no one in the long run. I registered for 3 classes to start: psychology, sociology, and English composition. The coursework gave me something to focus on besides court dates and medical appointments. Jamie's advocate suggested he try a social skills group for autistic teens that met every Thursday evening at the community center. Jamie resisted at first because Thursdays were for organizing his fossil collection and watching documentaries about prehistoric marine life. But the advocate explained the group focused on special interests, and several members loved paleontology. That got Jamie's attention enough to agree to one trial session. I drove him to the community center that first Thursday, feeling nervous about how he'd handle it. The group leader was a special education teacher who understood autism and didn't try to force eye contact or physical interaction. 6 other teens sat around a table sharing facts about their interests. Jamie listened quietly for the first 30 minutes, then suddenly started talking about Cretaceous period marine reptiles. Another boy immediately responded with information about mosasaurs, and they spent the next hour trading facts back and forth. Watching Jamie connect with someone who understood his way of communicating filled me with hope I hadn't felt in months. He came home that night and announced Thursdays would now include social skills group before fossil organization. His ability to adjust his routine when something mattered to him showed growth I hadn't expected. The trial date got set for 3 months away. Our lawyer scheduled multiple preparation sessions to get us ready for testimony. She explained that Carol's defense would try to discredit everything we said. They'd claim Jamie's memory was unreliable because of his autism. They'd suggest I was a jealous stepdaughter who resented Carol's relationship with Dad. They'd paint Carol as a stressed caregiver who made mistakes under pressure rather than a calculating criminal. The lawyer walked us through potential questions and how to answer them clearly without getting emotional. She warned that testifying would be difficult because Carol's attorney would try to confuse and upset us. I felt sick thinking about facing Carol in court, but I was determined to see this through. Jamie needed justice, and Dad deserved protection even if he couldn't understand what was happening anymore. Dad's condition kept declining gradually over those months. He had more bad days than good ones. He'd forget where he was and call out for my mom who'd been dead for 6 years. He'd ask about going to work even though he'd been on disability for 2 years. The neurologist explained that early onset dementia often progressed faster than the late onset type. We needed to focus on keeping Dad comfortable and safe rather than hoping for improvement. Lisa and I made the heartbreaking decision to start hospice services. A hospice nurse began visiting 3 times a week to check Dad's vitals and adjust his medications. The nurse was kind and patient, explaining everything in terms we could understand. She said Dad might have months or possibly a year depending on how quickly the disease progressed. Jamie didn't fully grasp what was happening, but he knew Dad was sick. He'd sit with Dad sometimes and read his dinosaur books out loud, even though Dad couldn't follow the words anymore. The simple presence seemed to comfort them both. 2 months before trial, everything changed again. Carol's lawyer contacted the district attorney with a plea offer. Carol would plead guilty to 6 felony counts in exchange for dropping the other charges and a recommended sentence of 7 years in prison. The DA called to ask our opinion because victim input mattered in plea negotiations. Lisa, our lawyer, and I discussed it for hours. Part of me wanted Carol to face all 12 charges and get maximum prison time. But our lawyer explained that trials were unpredictable, and juries sometimes made unexpected decisions. The plea deal guaranteed conviction and significant prison time. More importantly, it meant Jamie wouldn't have to testify. Putting him on the stand would be traumatic, even with preparation. After talking it through with everyone, including Jamie's advocate, we agreed to support the plea deal. 7 years felt like justice, even if it wasn't the maximum possible punishment. The plea hearing happened on a cold Tuesday morning in late November. We all went to court. Me, Lisa, our lawyer, and Jamie's advocate. Jamie stayed home with the health aide because there was no reason to put him through this. Carol stood before Judge Darling wearing an orange jumpsuit because she'd been denied bail after violating the protective order. The judge asked if she understood she was giving up her right to trial by pleading guilty. Carol said yes in a flat voice. The prosecutor read each charge out loud: fraud, forgery, elder abuse, child endangerment, conspiracy, theft. After each one, Judge Darling asked how Carol pleaded. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 6 times Carol admitted what she'd done. She offered no apology or explanation, just mechanical guilty pleas like she was reading from a script. Judge Darling accepted the plea but said she was reserving sentencing for 1 month to review victim impact statements and sentencing recommendations. Carol's lawyer requested she remain free on bail pending sentencing, but Judge Darling denied it immediately. Carol would stay in jail until sentencing. Watching her face when the judge made that ruling, I saw real fear replace the blank expression she'd worn all morning. I spent the next 2 weeks writing my victim impact statement. 5 pages describing how Carol's actions affected our family. The terror I felt when I overheard her phone call. The trauma of watching Jamie have a meltdown while strange men tried to take him. The betrayal of discovering she'd been systematically stealing from Dad and forging his signature for months. The ongoing impact of managing Dad's declining health while trying to maintain some kind of normal life for Jamie. I wrote about the nightmares I still had where Carol succeeded in taking Jamie away. I wrote about the trust issues I now had with anyone new who came into our lives. I wanted Judge Darling to understand the full scope of damage Carol caused to people who'd welcomed her into our family. Lisa wrote her own statement describing the financial burden and emotional toll of becoming an unexpected guardian to her nephew and brother-in-law. Jamie's advocate submitted a statement about the psychological harm Carol intended by trying to institutionalize an autistic child who was thriving at home. We wanted the judge to see Carol's actions weren't just legal violations, but attacks on the most vulnerable members of our family. The sentencing hearing arrived on a Friday morning 3 weeks before Christmas. The courthouse was decorated with wreaths and garland, which felt wrong given what we were there for. Judge Darling spent 20 minutes reviewing the case file, the plea agreement, the victim impact statements, and the sentencing recommendations. Then she looked directly at Carol and started speaking. She said that exploiting vulnerable people, especially children and the cognitively impaired, represented a profound betrayal of trust that struck at the foundation of family and society. She said Carol had targeted her own stepson and husband for financial gain with complete disregard for their well-being or dignity. She said the psychiatric evaluation showed Carol was fully capable of understanding her actions and chose to commit crimes anyway. Judge Darling sentenced Carol to 8 years in prison, 1 year more than the plea recommendation, with no eligibility for early release. The courtroom was silent except for Carol's sharp intake of breath when she heard 8 years instead of 7. Carol was led away in handcuffs by 2 bailiffs. She didn't look at us as she left. I felt relief wash over me because she couldn't hurt us anymore. But I also felt anger at everything she'd done, and sadness that Dad's final years were poisoned by someone he'd trusted enough to marry. Lisa squeezed my hand and we stood up to leave. Our lawyer said she'd file the civil suit next week to recover the stolen money. We walked out of the courthouse into cold December air, and I took my first deep breath in months. It wasn't over completely, but the biggest threat was gone. Carol would be in prison until Jamie was 21 years old. By then, he'd be an adult with his own life and dreams. She'd stolen enough from us already. She wouldn't get the chance to steal his future, too. Our lawyer met with us the following week to discuss the civil case. She sat across from Lisa and me at her office conference table with folders spread out containing bank statements and forged documents. She explained we could sue Carol's estate for the stolen money and go after Richard's organization as co-conspirators. Lisa signed the paperwork authorizing the suit while I watched through the office window as snow started falling outside. The lawyer said Carol's assets were limited, but we might recover some of the $40,000 she'd taken from Dad's accounts. She filed the lawsuit the next day, and Carol's lawyer responded within a week asking to settle. They knew they couldn't win with all the evidence we had. The settlement negotiations took 3 weeks of back-and-forth offers until both sides agreed on $30,000. We'd lost $10,000 to Carol's spending, but getting most of it back felt like a small victory. The money went straight into a trust account that our lawyer set up for Dad's care expenses and Jamie's future needs. It wouldn't solve everything, but it eased the constant worry about medical bills and therapy costs. Lisa handled all the financial paperwork while I focused on managing Dad's daily care and Jamie's routines. Dad started declining faster over the next few months. His good days became less frequent, and he'd forget who we were for hours at a time. The home health aide came every morning to help him shower and dress because he couldn't manage those tasks anymore. Jamie noticed the changes but didn't understand what they meant. He'd sit on the floor next to Dad's chair reading his dinosaur encyclopedia out loud, even when Dad stared blankly at the television. I asked Jamie once why he kept reading when Dad didn't respond. He looked at me confused and said Dad always liked hearing about dinosaurs, so he should keep hearing about them. The simple logic made my chest hurt. Dad seemed calmer when Jamie was nearby, even if he couldn't follow the words anymore. Some afternoons, I'd find them both in the living room with Jamie's books spread everywhere, and Dad's hand resting on Jamie's shoulder. Neither of them spoke, but the quiet presence seemed to comfort them both. 6 months after Carol's sentencing, Dad stopped eating much. The hospice nurse said his body was shutting down and we should prepare ourselves. Lisa took another leave from work and moved back in with us. We set up a hospital bed in Dad's room and took turns sitting with him around the clock. Jamie asked detailed questions about what happens when people die. He wanted to know if Dad would stop breathing first, or if his heart would stop first. I tried to explain gently that we didn't know exactly how it would happen, but Dad wouldn't be in pain. Jamie nodded and went back to organizing his dinosaur collection by size instead of geological period. He said Dad liked the big ones best, so he wanted them where Dad could see them. On a Tuesday morning just after sunrise, Dad took 3 slow breaths and then stopped. Lisa and I were both sitting on either side of his bed holding his hands. The hospice nurse checked his pulse and confirmed he was gone. I felt numb and relieved at the same time because he'd been suffering and now he wasn't. Jamie came in when we called him and stared at Dad for a long minute. He asked if Dad's brain had stopped working completely now. I said yes. He asked if that meant Dad wasn't confused anymore. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I told him maybe that was true. Jamie touched Dad's hand carefully and said goodbye. Then he asked when the funeral would be and what we'd say about Dad. I explained we'd have a small service and people would share memories. Jamie insisted we had to include dinosaur facts because Dad always encouraged his interest in paleontology. Lisa agreed immediately. At the funeral 3 days later, Jamie stood up in front of 20 people and recited 5 facts about Triceratops, which had been Dad's favorite. He explained that Dad taught him to love learning and never made him feel bad for being different. Several people cried, but Jamie just sat back down and folded his hands in his lap. The court scheduled a hearing 2 weeks after Dad's funeral to finalize permanent guardianship. Lisa had been Jamie's temporary guardian, but now we needed to make it official. Judge Darling reviewed all the documents and asked Jamie if he understood what guardianship meant. Jamie explained in precise detail that Lisa would make legal decisions for him, but I would still be his primary caregiver, and we'd work together. The judge smiled and said that was exactly right. She signed the guardianship order and told our family she was impressed by how we'd protected Jamie and supported each other through crisis. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt the weight of the past year pressing down on me. Carol was in prison. Dad was gone. But Jamie was safe, and that's what mattered most. I finished my final semester of college 8 months after everything started. Balancing classes with Jamie's care and the legal proceedings had been brutal, but I'd managed to complete all my requirements. Lisa and Jamie came to my graduation ceremony and sat in the 4th row cheering when my name was called. I walked across the stage thinking about how close I'd come to dropping out when Carol tried to take Jamie. My academic advisor had helped me navigate extensions and incomplete grades so I could finish despite everything. After the ceremony, I checked my email and found an acceptance letter from a graduate program in social work. I'd applied on a whim, inspired by Kathleen, the social worker, and Jamie's advocate who'd helped us so much. The program would let me help other families facing similar crises. Lisa hugged me hard when I showed her the acceptance letter. She said Mom would be proud. Jamie turned 14 in July, and his special interests started expanding. He still loved dinosaurs, but now he spent hours researching paleontology programs at different universities. He made spreadsheets comparing curriculum requirements and faculty research interests. He asked me detailed questions about college applications and what grades he'd need. I helped him research schools with good disability support services because he'd need accommodations for his autism. He printed out information about 5 universities and ranked them by the quality of their fossil collections. His dreams were becoming real plans, and watching him think about his future filled me with hope. He'd gone from being a target for Carol's exploitation to being a kid planning his education. That transformation felt like the biggest victory. Lisa decided to sell her old place and move permanently to our city. She'd been commuting back and forth for months, and it didn't make sense anymore. She found an apartment 10 minutes from our house and moved in over one weekend. Jamie helped her unpack and organized her kitchen cabinets by size and frequency of use. She laughed and left them that way. She told me one night that she'd never expected to become a co-parent to her nephew and brother, but our family had become the most important thing in her life. I understood what she meant. We looked different from we had 2 years ago, but we were stronger. No one was lying or hiding things. We worked together and protected each other. That's what family should be. The mail brought a notice about Richard's criminal trial. He'd been sentenced to 15 years in prison, and his organization was sued by 8 different families. Our case had started a domino effect that protected other vulnerable people from the same exploitation. The prosecutor sent a letter thanking us for our cooperation and explaining that our evidence had been crucial to building cases against Richard and his network. Knowing we'd made that difference helped me make sense of everything we'd been through. Carol had tried to destroy our family for money, but instead she'd exposed a system that was hurting lots of families. Other kids like Jamie were safer now because we'd fought back. A year after Carol's sentencing, I started my graduate program in social work. I took mostly evening classes, so I could still be home with Jamie during the day. Lisa adjusted her work schedule to cover the times I was in class. We developed smooth routines that let everyone pursue their goals while making sure Jamie had consistent support. He was doing well in 8th grade and had joined a paleontology club that met twice a month. The club took field trips to dig sites and museums. Jamie came home from each trip talking nonstop about fossils and rock formations. His autism meant he processed the world differently, but with the right support, he was thriving. I watched him grow more confident each month and felt grateful we'd protected him from Carol's plan. She'd wanted to institutionalize him for profit. Instead, he was participating in clubs and planning for college and living the life he deserved. A letter arrived in the mail about 3 months later with an official state seal on the envelope. Jamie's advocate had nominated our family for a state award recognizing advocacy for people with disabilities. I read the letter twice because it felt unreal that anyone would recognize what we'd been through as something worth celebrating. The ceremony was scheduled for the following month at the state capitol building. Jamie wanted to know exactly what would happen at the ceremony, so I called the organizer and got a detailed schedule for him. He studied it carefully and asked questions about where we'd sit and what time each part would start. The predictability helped him feel ready. On the day of the ceremony, we drove to the Capitol and found the auditorium where the event was being held. Jamie wore a button-up shirt with tiny dinosaur prints that Lisa had found online. About 50 families were being recognized for different achievements related to disability advocacy and support. When our turn came, Jamie walked to the podium with me and Lisa standing behind him. He'd written his own speech and practiced it 17 times according to his count. He explained how his autism gave him the ability to remember Carol's exact words from her phone conversation, and how that memory helped protect both himself and Dad from her plan. His voice stayed steady as he talked about being proud of who he was and grateful for a family that understood his needs. The audience clapped and several people approached us afterward to share their own stories about fighting for their disabled family members. One woman told Jamie he was brave, and he corrected her saying he wasn't brave, just accurate about what he heard. That made her laugh, and she told him accuracy was its own kind of courage. My internship placement at a family services agency started the following week. I worked with families navigating guardianship and disability systems, helping them understand their options and find resources. The work challenged me because every family's situation was different, and the systems were complicated. I met parents trying to protect their adult disabled children from predatory caregivers. I met siblings taking on guardianship responsibilities they never expected. I met grandparents raising disabled grandchildren after their own children died or disappeared. Each case reminded me of our experience with Carol and how close we'd come to losing Jamie. I used what we'd learned to help these families avoid similar traps. I showed them how to document everything, how to question suspicious documents, how to demand second opinions on medical decisions. Every family I helped felt like honoring what we'd survived and making Dad's memory count for something beyond just our household. Lisa started dating someone she met through a support group for kinship caregivers. His name was Noah, and he'd raised his nephew after his sister went to prison for drug charges. They understood each other's lives in ways most people couldn't. Lisa brought him to dinner one evening, and Jamie interviewed him about his favorite dinosaur and whether he knew the difference between the Triassic and Jurassic periods. Noah answered seriously and admitted he didn't know much about dinosaurs, but was willing to learn. That satisfied Jamie's requirements for approval. Watching Lisa rebuild her personal life while maintaining her commitment to us showed me that caregiving didn't mean giving up everything else. We could have our own identities and dreams and relationships while still being there for each other. She'd sacrificed a lot to help us, but she wasn't sacrificing her whole future. That balance seemed important. The mail brought an acceptance letter for Jamie from a summer program for teens interested in paleontology at a natural history museum 2 hours away. He'd applied 3 months earlier with help from his school counselor. The program ran for 2 weeks with participants staying in supervised dorm housing on a college campus. Jamie read the acceptance letter 4 times, and then asked detailed questions about the daily schedule, roommate assignments, and what would happen if he had a meltdown. We contacted the program coordinator, who explained they had experience with autistic participants and would work with Jamie's needs. We prepared carefully, packing his comfort items and creating a visual schedule for each day. He called home every evening to report what fossils he'd examined and what he'd learned. When we picked him up at the end of 2 weeks, he talked nonstop during the entire drive home about Cretaceous period marine reptiles and the proper techniques for fossil preparation. The program had been his first extended time away from home, and he'd managed it successfully. 2 years after everything started with Carol's phone call, I walked across the stage at my graduate school ceremony to receive my master's degree in social work. Lisa and Jamie sat in the audience cheering louder than anyone else. I'd accepted a job at a nonprofit specializing in disability rights and family advocacy starting the following month. The position would let me work directly with families while also helping shape policies and programs. After the ceremony ended, Jamie approached the microphone during the reception, when they were invited family members to speak. He'd written a speech without telling anyone. He talked about how I'd protected him when Carol tried to send him away, and how family meant showing up for each other even when things got hard. He said I'd taught him that protecting people you love was the most important work anyone could do. His words made me cry in front of everyone, and I didn't care who saw. We established a small scholarship fund in Dad's name for students with disabilities pursuing science education. Jamie helped design the application criteria, insisting it should focus on passion and potential rather than grades. He said some of the smartest people he knew didn't do well on tests, because tests measured the wrong things. We set up the fund with money recovered from the civil suit against Carol, plus donations from family and friends. The first recipient was an autistic girl who wanted to study marine biology. She sent Jamie a thank you letter describing her dream of researching whale communication patterns. Jamie wrote back with a list of recommended books about marine mammal evolution. A notice arrived from the parole board 5 years after Carol's sentencing. She was eligible for parole, and we had the right to submit statements about her release. Lisa, Jamie, and I each wrote statements opposing her parole. I described how her actions had traumatized Jamie and stolen Dad's final years. Lisa explained the ongoing impact of Carol's betrayal on our family's ability to trust others. Jamie wrote a factual account of Carol's plan and her lack of remorse during the plea hearing. The parole board held a hearing, and we attended to make sure our voices were heard. They denied Carol's application, citing her lack of remorse and the severity of her crimes against vulnerable family members. We left the hearing feeling relieved but also ready to move forward regardless of her status. Carol's presence or absence didn't define us anymore. Jamie turned 16 and started thinking seriously about his future beyond just loving dinosaurs. He was thriving in the school with a small group of friends who shared his interests in science and natural history. They met twice a week to watch documentaries and argue about evolutionary theories. Jamie researched colleges with strong paleontology programs and good disability support services. He made spreadsheets comparing schools based on faculty research, fossil collections, campus accessibility, and autism support resources. He asked me detailed questions about college applications, financial aid, and what living in a dorm would be like. His dreams were becoming concrete plans with timelines and action steps. He wanted to study vertebrate paleontology and maybe work at a museum or teach at a university someday. Those goals seemed completely achievable with the right support. Lisa and Noah got engaged on a Saturday morning during breakfast when he asked her while she was eating cereal. She said yes immediately and called us right away. Jamie and I helped plan the wedding, which they wanted to keep small and focused on family. The ceremony happened in a garden with about 30 guests. During the reception, Jamie gave a toast he'd prepared and practiced. He talked about how Lisa had saved us and built a real family from the broken pieces Carol left behind. He said Lisa taught him that family wasn't just about biology, but about people who showed up when things got hard and stayed even when it would be easier to leave. He welcomed Noah to our family and told him the expectations included learning about dinosaurs and being available for emergency phone calls. Everyone laughed and Noah promised to meet all requirements. I got promoted to program director at my nonprofit 18 months after starting there. The position meant overseeing services for 50 families navigating guardianship and disability systems. I hired staff who had lived experience with disability, either personally or as family members. We built a team that understood what families went through because we'd been through it ourselves. We created resources that could have helped us 3 years ago when we were fighting Carol and trying to figure out the legal system. Every family we served got assigned an advocate who explained their options clearly and helped them avoid predatory situations. We tracked outcomes and saw families successfully protecting their disabled members while maintaining their quality of life. The work felt meaningful in ways my old plans never had. Dad's memorial service happened 3 months later, and Jamie read from his dinosaur book because that felt right. The funeral director looked confused, but I told him it was perfect. Jamie explained how paleontologists study extinction events to understand how life adapts and continues, and everyone understood what he meant without him having to say it directly. Carol remained in prison, her appeals denied one after another because the evidence against her was overwhelming. Richard Pittman got 15 years for his facility fraud scheme, and investigators found 11 other families he'd targeted the same way he tried to target us. Our case started everything unraveling for him. Lisa sold her house and moved into the neighborhood, buying a place 2 streets over so she could be close, but we all had our own space. She met someone at a support group for kinship caregivers, a teacher named Noah who had custody of his nephew, and they understood each other's lives in ways other people couldn't. I finished my degree online while working part-time at a nonprofit that helped families navigate disability services and guardianship issues. Every family I helped felt like honoring what we survived. Jamie turned 16 and started researching colleges with strong paleontology programs and good autism support services. He made spreadsheets comparing schools and asked me questions about dorm life and meal plans. His future was real and possible. Lisa and Noah got married in a small ceremony where Jamie gave a toast about family being the people who show up when things get hard. I got promoted to program director, hiring staff who had lived experience with disability. We built resources that could have helped us 3 years ago. 3 years after everything started, our family was different but stronger. Jamie excelled in advanced science classes and had friends who shared his interests. Lisa was happily married, but still came over twice a week for dinner. I made a real difference at work while staying Jamie's primary support. We healed without forgetting what we survived. On a Sunday morning, I watched Jamie organize his dinosaur collection by geological period, just like he did the day everything changed. But now he did it in a safe home with people who loved and protected him, planning a future where his autism was supported rather than exploited. We didn't just survive Carol's betrayal. We built something better from it, and that victory mattered most.